Welcome students for online classes. So today we'll continue with the chapter 3 and the statistics, that is organization of data. In the earlier session we had studied about the frequency distribution, how to prepare a frequency distribution, and in this session we'll study about the frequency curve and the frequency distribution, how the classes to be ascertained. First thing, that is frequency curve, that is a graphical representation of the frequency distribution is called frequency curve. It is made based upon the classes and the frequency which we had taken into consideration from the raw data, the classes which will be writing on the x-axis and the frequency which will be writing on the y-axis, and based upon that we will make the line graph or the curve graph. Next, and the main thing under the chapter is about how to prepare a frequency distribution. So based upon all these questions we will ascertain how the classes can be made, how the frequency can be made, everything. So the first thing, how many classes should we have? So based upon range, so what is range? Range is the difference between the largest value and the smallest value. So based upon the range, what did we do in the earlier session? We had studied how to make the classes. So is it easy to make the larger classes, or is it easy to make the smaller classes, or to what extent the variables are being changing? All these things we will study how to make a class. First and foremost, what you need to do, first thing you need to ascertain about the range, that is the largest value from the raw data and the smallest value from the raw data. After ascertaining the largest and the smallest value from the raw data, we will check into whether the values are widely spread or whether the values are narrowly spread. Widely spread in the sense whether there are 100 values, whether there are 200 values. Narrowly spread in the sense whether there are only 10 raw data values or whether there are only 20 raw data values, which are very easier to ascertain. Next thing, after obtaining the value of range, that is the largest value and the smallest value, it becomes easier to determine the class interval. So now what is class interval? We had studied in the earlier session, that is the difference between the upper class limit and the lower class limit. So based upon this example, here 10 is the lower class limit and 15 is the upper class limit. So what is class interval? The difference between the upper class limit and the lower class limit, that is 15 minus 10 is the class interval. So based upon the class interval we can even ascertain the classes. How will you ascertain the classes? The number of classes which should be not too large. Just because why it should not be too large? Because it will be very difficult. It should not be too small. Why? Because it will be even more difficult when you have larger values like 200 values or 500 values. So it will be very difficult. If you ascertain the larger values also, it will be very difficult for you to take the frequencies. So at this point of time, what happens if you choose the small class interval? If you choose a small class interval, this will be the problem. If you have the value from 0 to 85, what have I done? I have chosen the smallest class interval, that is the interval of 5. So it will be very lengthier process. If you have 200, you need to make till 200 values. So it will be very difficult. So what happens if you choose the class interval very large? So if you choose a class interval very large, like 0 to 20 or 20 to 40, or even like 0 to 30, 30 to 60, what happens? It is very much important that the class interval should be equal for each and everything. So what did we do here? Every class interval has the equivalence of 5. In the same way, even if I take into consideration the larger values, the class interval here is 20. So even 20 should be equal to all the class interval. So what happens if I take the larger values? Sometimes while calculating the frequency, there might be the possibilities of losing some of the information. So you should be very precise while calculating this class interval. So this is about, once you know about the class interval, what can you do? You can add up. So what is the class interval here? The class interval is 20. So you can add up 20 for the 20. So it will be 40. In the same way, if you don't know what will come for the next thing, what is the mainest thing thing, the continuous data which you should form. So here 2020 is the continuous raw data. In the same way, which will be the next data? 40 will be the next data. So what can you do here? You can add 20 to the 40. 20 is the class interval, so 40 plus 20 is 60. So the next classes will be 40 to 60. In the same way, you can ascertain based upon the class interval. The next question is, what should be the size of each class? So what is mainest thing? So here the class and the class interval are interdependent to each another. So what is class? This equals 0 to 20 is class. What is class interval? The difference between the upper limit and the lower limit is known as class. In the same way, what is interdependent? Here both the class and the class interval are interdependent on each other. Once you ascertain what is the class interval of each and every class, you can ascertain what is the class for each and every classes which you need to prepare during the frequency distribution. Next thing is about how should we determine the class limits. Now what are the class limits? There are two limits of a class, two ends of a class, that is the upper limit and the lower limit. So now how will you classify the class limits? So when we classify the raw data of the continuous variable, so what is continuous variable? 0 to 20, 20 to 40, all these are the continuous variable. So while doing the frequency distribution, it is very much important for you to ascertain which is the upper limit of the class and which is the lower limit of the class. So how will you ascertain all these things? So for example, I have taken into consideration 10 to 20, 20 to 30 and 20 to 30, where the class limit of all these things is 10. So what is what is the class interval? The difference between the upper limit and the lower limit. What is the class interval here? That is the equivalence of 10 for the all the other things. The upper class limit of the class, that is 20, is taken into consideration, so that you add the class interval, so that you will get the answer as 30. So based upon the class interval, you can ascertain which next class you can do or which next class you can prepare. So by this method, you can repeat all the other classes as well. For example, here I know that the value is 20 to 30. So I don't know which is the next value. So what is the mainest thing? You need to write the continuous variable 30. So what you need to add here? You need to add a class interval. What is the class interval here? The class interval is 10. So if you add 30 to 10, the answer will be 40. So the next class will be 30 to 40. So that is about the class interval which you can ascertain based upon the raw data. Okay. So under this particular class interval, under this class limits, we have two data. So we need to calculate two data based upon the class interval, that is exclusive method and the inclusive method. First thing, what is exclusive method? Upper class limits are excluded and the lower class limits are included in the respective classes, known as exclusive method. Why are these methods taken into consideration? It is taken into consideration to make the frequency. Okay, what the exclusive method tells? Upper class limit are excluded and lower class limit are included. Here the upper class limit are excluded and the lower class limits are included. Why is it taken into consideration? So you will be having so many data. Here I have taken only limited data into consideration, so it won't be very difficult for you. When will it be difficult for you? It will be difficult when you have larger volume of data, maybe 100 raw data, maybe 200 raw data. At that particular point of time, it will be very difficult for you to ascertain whether 2 should come here or 2 should come here. So the value under the frequency, when you take into consideration the value 2, where you need to apply this. So the exclusive data has made you even more easier. So the upper class limit should be excluded and lower class limit should be included. So here what should I do? Here the value 2 I need to exclude from here, and I should take the lower class limit from the next class, so that I can ascertain 2 in my value of the frequency. So if what happens, even if I take 2 value here for the frequency and even the value 2 here for the frequency, my frequency distribution will be wrong. So how many raw data are present in my data, only so many frequencies should become when once I add all these. Okay, so that is the basic thing. So because of this, the upper limit of the class is been excluded and the lower limit of the next class is been included. That is made because of this frequency can be ascertained easily. That was under the exclusive method. Now we will study about the inclusive method. Here both upper and lower class limits are being included in the respective classes. That is known as inclusive method. How the upper class limit and the lower class limit are being included? So here under inclusive method there will be no continuous data. Here can you see the continuous data? No, right? Because the values are 0 to 1, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, 6 to 7. There is no continuity. Continuity in the sense how there should be continuity. The continuity should be like this: 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6. So the upper limit of the first class and the lower limit of the second class should be equal. That is known as continuous data. So what happens in the inclusive data? With the frequency are being included. So what does the inclusive method tells? Both the upper class and the lower class limits are taken into consideration for the frequency distribution. But what happens here? There is no continuity. So how can you make the continuity among these two frequencies? It can be made. First, what we need to do, we need to find the gap. So what is the gap? The gap between the upper limit of the first class and the lower limit of the second class. So what is the gap between 1 and 2? The difference between 2 and 1 is 1. First we need to ascertain the gap. What is the gap between the upper limit of the first class and the lower limit of the second class? So this is the first class, this is the second class, this is the third class. So the upper limit of first class and the lower limit of the second class. So what is the gap? The gap is 1. So we need to ensure whether there is continuity in the classifying data or not. There is no continuity here. As there is no continuity, what should we do? We need to adjust in the following way. So what is the following way will be: first we need to find the difference. So we have found the difference. What is the difference? That is the difference of 1. After finding the difference, you need to divide it by 2. Why you need to divide it by 2? Because you have only 2 values taken into consideration. So based upon the value which you have got, divide this value divided by 2. So you will get an answer of 0.5. So based upon this value, you need to substitute. How will you substitute? Subtract the value obtained from the lower limit. What you need to do? You need to deduct the value of the lower limit and add the value to the upper limit. So how can it be done? It be done by this. So what was the earlier data? I will show you the earlier data. This was the earlier data where there is no continuity. So what did we do? We added to the upper limit and deducted 0.5 from the lower limit. I will show you how it is done. So this is done. What is the line? Subtract the value from the lower limit. So which is the lower limit? 0, 1.5, 3.5. This is the lower limit. So we have subtracted. So which was the earlier value? The earlier value was 246. Now we have subtracted 0.5 from that, and later what it tells, add the values to the upper limits. Have we added the values to the upper limit? I will show you the earlier thing. This was the earlier data and the changed data from now we have the continuity here from 1.5 to 1.5, 1.5 to 3.5. In the same way we have continuity. So after doing the inclusive data, what are we supposed to do? How will we do the frequency? Now we have 1.5 here, 1.5 here. So we need to shift it to the earlier procedure, that was to the exclusive. We need to leave the upper limit of the first class and add on to the lower limit of the second class. So this is basically about the two data which we take into consideration when there is no continuity. First one is about exclusive data and second one is about the inclusive data. The last one is about how should we get the frequency for each class? So how did you ascertain the frequency? Based upon the raw data which you have and based upon the classes which you made, you started to taking up the frequency. Now it will be even more easier if you use the tally marking. Now what is tally marking? Tally marking is a counting of a tally which can be made easier. You put 4 as a line and last one will be put as a slash. So this is known as tally marking. This is a count of 5 where you make for each and everything. So the sixth thing will be after 1 2 3 4 5 putting a slash, the next thing will be 6 will be like this. In the same way you take everything into consideration. So this tally marking helps you in ascertaining the frequency. For example, if there are n number of frequency and you need to write everything somewhere, that one number of 2 is here, 2 number of 2 is here, in expect to that you can even take into consideration the tally marking. So tally marking will be like this, 1 will be like this. So if I take into consideration 9, so what will be 9? 5 4 will be like this, 5 will be cut on with the 4 marking. So this is about the tally marking. Once you complete the 10, 11 will be continued in the same way, 10 the 5 group and even with the 1. So what are you supposed to do today in the sense, after watching the session, prepare, it is the assignment part, prepare a frequency distribution. Under frequency distribution, what are you supposed to find out? The class, frequency, lower limit, upper limit, midpoint, cumulative frequency, and the tally marking. Tally marking is a new thing which we have studied in this session. So based upon these values, based upon the raw data, you need to prepare the frequency distribution. And the assignment for today is, list the 4 questions that to be addressed while preparing the frequency distribution. Briefly explain what is exclusive method and inclusive method and the frequency distribution you need to prepare. Thank you, students.